Greetings, everyone. Kia ora tata, and welcome to this meeting, this extraordinary meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee. Good to see such a good attendance, and lovely to have an agenda that, while it might take us a while, has only got one item on it for a change. I'll move to the apologies. We have an apology from Councillor Hall, and he's the only one now, as far as I'm aware, seconded by Councillor Walker. Any discussion? Those in favour, please say aye. Against, no. That's agreed. And I'll move that we confirm the agenda without addition or alteration. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Walker again. No discussion. Councillor van der Vish, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I would like to know why it is that this agenda has arrived as an extraordinary Planning and Environment Committee meeting without the usual time given to read through what is 157 pages of information.
Okay, I'll go to the Chief Executive to respond to that question. Ms. Graham?
So this is an extraordinary meeting because it's not one that is part of the normal meeting schedule. It meets the definition of extraordinary in terms of the Act. That requires that papers are only available, they need to be available a minimum 24 hours in advance of the meeting. Councillors had the papers 48 hours, give or take, I think maybe 46 hours in advance of the meeting.
The question was, why? Why are we doing it as an extraordinary meeting? Why couldn't we just have it in the normal run of meetings?
Fine, sure. Because work is intended to start on the week of the 26th of April, and there wasn't an opportunity to provide councillors with the detailed designs at a regular meeting in advance of work starting.
So there was no reason then why we shouldn't have had the normal 3 days in advance with the paperwork?
And there was, because the paperwork also, in terms of getting it finalised in a presentation form for council, wasn't available. But as I said, the meeting is an extraordinary meeting and the requirements for reports is 24 hours.
I understand the extraordinary meeting requirements. I was just questioning why it was an extraordinary meeting. Thank you for your explanation.
Thank you. My understanding also is that it wasn't originally intended to be on our previous meeting schedule at the last meeting, but the material wasn't ready. With the motion has been moved and seconded.
Councillor, you have a question from Councillor Wiley.
Sorry, I didn't see that. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Can I just have a clarification through the chair on why we are only noting this report and not accepting it?
It's the normal process to note these sorts of reports as far as I'm concerned. Ms. Graham, do you want to make some comment?
Correct, it's a noting report. There's no decision of council required. You're simply noting the report. That's the standard process that we do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll put it. Those in favour, please raise a hand. Again? No one. That's agreed. Thank you very much. Can I remind people of the declaration of interest? Are there any, and the associated responsibilities? Are there any amendments, changes, deletions? No one suggested. In that case, we'll note and confirm the proposed management plans. I'll move. Seconded by Councillor Elder. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, no. That's agreed. Thank you. And that takes us to the Part A reports. And I'll hand over now to Ms. Graham, Mr. Drew, and the Chief Executive, and Dr. Hazelton.
So Dr. Hazelton and I will heavily take questions now on the report. We don't have any introductory comments.
Okay, no introductory comments. Could I just make for everyone, please, a comment about questions? I thought it was really productive yesterday, and lots of questions were asked by pretty much everyone. I'm asking you to consider, though, asking questions sort of in ones or twos rather than and a great long list. And I'm not suggesting I would restrict anyone's questions in any way, but I think it would be a better dynamic in the meeting if we all went around as many times as we need to go around with whatever questions need to be asked. So I'll leave that to see whether you think that's worth considering or not. And the first question comes up is from His Worship.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not so much a question, but happy to move the recommendations in due course.
Thank you. Nothing of the staff of Dr. Hazelton at the moment. As noted. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the report, Dr. Hazelton et al. It's fantastic. I've got just 3 questions, and one I did bring up in the workshop yesterday, but I think it's worth asking it again just for anybody else who's listening in. Being a very proud city of diversity, as I mentioned yesterday, I don't see currently anything that recognises our significant rainbow or Takatapui community. So any plans afoot and or ongoing discussions with the rainbow community about how they may be included at some point hence? Question 1.
Dr. Hazelton.
Yes, absolutely. This week we had a brief meeting with Dunedin Pride to have a talk about how we might hui and talk about some of these issues moving forward, including that of the rainbow crossing. So still plenty of opportunities to do so, just waiting for the right opportunity to have those discussions.
Thank you. And I assume it's not necessarily a rainbow crossing. It could be some other recognition.
Correct, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. And the second question is, and I think a lot of the questions today might emanate from the fact that this was released yesterday and it's been online. And I think, and this question certainly comes from me reading some of the stuff online. And a number of people have raised questions around the use of the pavers and their suitability for less mobile people and perhaps people in wheelchair users. So do you have any thoughts or comments around that?
Absolutely. So we're going to be doing a trial of those pavers. I'd also just reinforce that it's important not to look at our current paving and think that it's going to be in any way similar to that. So pavement design has come forward quite a long way in the last 30 years. So the pavers are a completely different style of paver. The base that they will be laid on is entirely different. And we have been working closely with the disability community and recognise those concerns about the way they are laid and maintained. So we are going to be doing a trial of that. And we're also confident that this will be a much better surface than exists now and probably a better surface than we could guarantee with asphalt or other materials, given the amount that paving in the city does get disturbed.
Great, that's a comprehensive answer. My final question for now, again, is just sort of to clear up some misinformation perhaps that's emanating out in the community. And it's around the finances. So just to clarify that the 28.2 million budget for this is for the above ground work and that the Three Waters work is from a separate budget.
Correct.
And so subsequent to that, is it not the case that if we didn't spend this 28.2 million, there would still be a relatively substantial cost for putting it back as is?
Correct.
And do we know roughly what that figure would be? Just roughly.
I can dig out that figure. We have done some pricing. It just the actual figure escapes me at the moment.
I'll check. Mr. Drew, do you know that figure?
I've got 12 million in my head.
No, I had slightly more, but I don't know.
No, the figure escapes me as well. Sorry.
Okay.
We do have that.
I know it's a significant number. Thank you. That's it for now.
You're on mute, Mr. Chairman.
My apology. Dr. Hazel, I think you didn't hear me thank Councillor Walker for his 5 questions in that case. Dr. Hazelton, the issue you raised, the issue we raised about the quality of the pavers and the laying and the rest of it, we all know that pavers are also totally dependent on the skills of the people putting them down. A lot of our brick pavers have not been have properly maintained or were not properly laid originally. Are you confident that you've got enough people to do this work who can produce a product similar to the much more successful and very attractive paving in places like parts of Vogel Street?
Yes, we're confident of that, working through the construction team, yes.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I might end up having the same as Councillor Walker, a number of questions.
Would you mind doing them in bits rather than all in one great pile, please?
Oh, you didn't say that to Councillor Walker, Councillor Benson Pope?
I was fairly direct with my response to his 5.
I didn't hear that. I am concerned about the level of curbing and obstacles like furniture, etc., along the side of the road for blind and low vision people. You know, like, because there's no curb, they won't actually know where they stop to go on the road. I'm saying this because my son is blind, and so it's just that I'm trying to teach him that if he has a little bit of independence and decides to walk along the main street, he might get run over. That's all. I'm just wondering what issues there are, you know, like what have we done to help that? Because I just looking at that with the flat road and the obstacles that are there, I just can see there could be potential for injury, and I'm just wondering what we can do about that.
I'll answer that in 3 parts. Firstly, there's a full disability safety audit that gets undertaken before the works commence, so that is underway at the moment. Secondly, while you can't see it necessarily easily in the imagery, the definition between the pavers, there's actually a number of different types of paving in there, and some of them are more textured, so that gives like an edge for people to work to. And the third thing is that the current situation where we have under the verandas where most people walk is that is cluttered with other infrastructure, etc., and that will now be freed up of that. And so there's an easier line to walk down close to the buildings that is safe and far from the traffic.
Right, but you're working with people from Low Vision or the Blind Foundation, are you, to get it right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you. The other thing is on the images, and it just doesn't look like there's a clear cycle lane there. Is there going to be a cycle lane?
No, there's no cycle lane. This is operating much like a shared space, not quite like a shared space, but much like a shared space, in that we're encouraging people to share with care. If we did have a separate cycle lane, one of the challenges then is that people will use it more as a through route, which is not the desired use of the street. So we will be encouraging people to share with care, and that we'll be encouraging cyclists to also stick to a similar speed limit as the vehicles. And if they journeying through the area, they should be using a separate route. And we'll also be encouraging that by doing things like having the cycle parking at the beginnings of the block, and encouraging people to alight. It's not a very currently, it's not a very heavily used cycle route as it is anyway, because there are so many things in the way and people using it that it's not the most attractive route for people just trying to get from A to B as quickly as possible.
I just thought because it's one way and there's the whole other side of the road that could be utilised, and because it's trying to be people friendly, that they might have put a cycle lane in there. That was all.
No, I think the risk of this, doing the cycle lane that way, is that you'll then encourage people to be going quite quickly through that lane, and that's not what you'd want through that space.
What, the cyclists going quickly, you mean?
Correct, yes.
All right. Okay. I just wondered why we didn't consider bollards at the end of each section, of each block, that so then we could have had kept the area, the whole area, and so we could have events and things if you wanted to, so you could open them or close them off. But it also means that if for any reason we needed to go back to a 2-lane, say for an emergency, if we had safety issues around, police or fire vehicles trying to get through, is what, why didn't we consider that?
We have, and those are there. We have automatic bollards at the end of each block, and they'll be most likely controlled through an app. And we've talked with emergency services about their access to that as well, and that is all in hand.
So that'll mean that once those bollards open, we will be able to have 2 lanes. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that there would be opportunities to close off the blocks if required for events, etc., and that those bollards at the end would also allow emergency services to get in from the opposing direction if there was an emergency and they required to.
Okay, thank you.
It's all right. I was having technical trouble. Councillor Lord.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Glenn. I just had a couple of questions. One was in relation to, it said in the report about the number of native plantings locally sourced, but then it said it will be a balance also of non-native trees. And I'm just wondering, what will that balance be? Would it be 50-50?
I believe it's about 70-30.
70% native.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I did have another question too, and it's just slipped my mind. I'll come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question just around, obviously the plans have come out and a lot of people are excited and a lot of people have a lot of questions, and I was wondering how people can interact with the plan. I understand that you have an office that's opening in George Street, is that correct?
Yes, so Pito Whakatipu is our project office down at 125 George Street. And I've just sent a message off to the team to ensure that from next week after Easter, we have full sets of the plans there, and we always welcome people to come in and talk. And that won't just be me there that they can talk to, they can raise any issues with the urban designers and the construction team as well.
That's fantastic to hear, thank you, because we've had a lot of little questions coming in that probably we don't want to cover off in this meeting. My next question is just around the heritage buildings, and quite a lot is being made of these buildings, and it's great that the sightlines are being protected. And I just wanted to know, so people have commented on the dilapidated verandas, etc., and I wonder if you're working with the owners of the heritage buildings?
Yeah, so two things there in response. Yes, there's a piece of work that we're putting together now with some guidance and advice for owners about the types of things that they may be able to do to really highlight those buildings while we're doing our part of the work as well, and looking at some incentives to further incentivize that. And as I believe you're probably the chair of the Heritage Fund, there's probably opportunities through that fund as well. So we're going to make sure that we connect those things up to ensure that people do know that there are opportunities for them to do some work now, and they may be able to get some funding for that. And I believe there's an upcoming round closing at the end of April.
It is. Thank you for the tip. We hope lots of people apply. Thank you for your
Councillor Gary.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Hazelton, thank you for the report and for the wonderful design. I have a couple of questions. The first is, I found particularly moving the narrative as context for the design, and wondered how we are going to communicate that to our wider community, because I think it's a really important part of this. I know that there will be QR codes, etc., but as we go from this stage of presenting the detailed design to our community, how will we educate, communicate that wonderful narrative?
I'm sorry. My apologies. Thank you. There's a couple of different ways, as you noted, the QR codes. We've also, through Okaha, been working on the idea of a series of videos as well that will be showcasing many aspects of the project. But one of the first aspects of the project we'd obviously like to showcase is the cultural narrative and where the design has come from. So that will be one relatively short-term fixture, and then the second will be through the Totally George's website that will also have information up there available for people to learn more about many different aspects of the project, but particularly learning about the cultural narrative and why different design choices have been made and what they mean.
Wonderful. And so that will obviously there'll be a focus on kaitahi values, which is wonderful. there's a mention of other voices. How will the other voices be gained, interacted with, and then delivered?
I think one of the opportunities for that is also through Pito Whakatipu, our design base there, that we're encouraging people to come in and share their stories about George Street as well. There's been members of our design team whose own families have had properties in the past, grandparents, etc., or businesses, great-grandparents, etc., in the area, and they've told some really interesting stories about that family history that hasn't been shared anywhere else yet. So certainly to gather that. The other was a point that was touched on yesterday, but I'm sorry, I can't remember which of the councillors, that there are already a lot of other sources, or it might have been Simon, there's already a lot of other sources of information that we really just need to pull together into one place, or to provide a launching pad for people to be able to go off and find those. And so that's where the website will come in as well.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, if you'll indulge me, one more, disability community. You'll continue that conversation, I'm assuming, with the disability community in every way as you go through?
Yes, absolutely. I think for me, alongside the journey with Mana Whenua, the most important one has been working with the disability community and learning lots more about the needs of that community, and making sure that we embed that in all the work.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. I've got about 4 questions, so I'll do 2. I too was really impressed with the cultural interpretation and narrative. And coming from Eastern Bay, we have marae and sculptures and art and symbols around the community that reflect the Māori culture back to the community. And I was just wondering to know how important it is, and it was mentioned yesterday, for a culture, and particularly the Māori culture, to see their own selves in the streetscapes and what it means to them.
Sorry, we'd shifted on the screen. I couldn't find us to unmute.
Oh, do you want me to ask the question again?
No, it was just us finding our unmute. That's the problem. Look, I think the thing that has struck me that came through a number of times in the conversations that we've had with Mana Whenua is exactly the point that you've made, that ensuring people see their own identity in the streetscape, in the city, is very important. I can't speak to that personally from a Mana Whenua perspective, but I can speak to that as a member of the Rainbow community, that seeing those elements in streetscapes does matter and does show that you are a respected part of the community.
I think that's wonderful. Thank you. My next question is a question that a lot of the community are really concerned about, and I sent you an email about this and we talked about it yesterday, is around the parking plan, and not just on the street, but also how people connect to parking buildings, etc.
Sure. So one of the things that we're working very closely in with is the Shaping Future Dunedin projects, which there are a number of related to parking there, particularly around the wayfinding signage, for example. And that's something that we're already meeting with them about, to look at whether we can foreshadow any of that within this project to ensure people understand, hey, you can't get through this road at the moment, but if you take this one, you'll have direct access to this parking building. There's obviously some challenges in that, but it's something we're going to give a go, and to get that information out. Also, we did some maps just recently that are about to go live, which show actually where all the parking buildings are in the city, and I think that'll be a useful resource for people, because even in recent conversations I've had with people, they've not been aware of even long-term residents where some of those parking opportunities actually are.
And people ask, oh, have we lost any parks on the street?
So what we've done is, as I committed to at a previous, at the September meeting, is that we would endeavour to retain the same amount of car parking spaces along the street as we have currently. In the 3 blocks that in the 3 one-way blocks that has been achieved. The one caveat I will put on that is that at the moment in many of those blocks, for example, we may not have any, or we only have one disability park. So we would be looking to expand the number of disability parks. So the actual number of different time zones we haven't rationalised yet, but the same amount of car parking will be available in those 3 blocks. The only one we haven't resolved yet, because we need to squeeze in some more bus stops, is the Knox block. So we're still working on that and just trying to reposition some things to retain as much as we possibly can there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. That's 3 of your first 2. Leave your hand up and I'll come back to you. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Glenn, apologies for not, or Mr. Hazelton, Dr. Hazelton, apologies for not being there yesterday. Question I have is around fire and emergency, and you touched on it briefly in responding to one of the previous questions. And that is, have they been thoroughly consulted on around the ability to get their fire trucks in should there be a major fire in those blocks?
Sorry, I'm jumping the gun again. Yes, they have. We've met with them regularly through the design stage, and we're also meeting with them regularly through the construction phase as well, because there's obviously issues with getting into certain areas. And we had a meeting with them yesterday, and the feedback was very favourable. And
a follow-up question to that is the weight of the trucks would be accommodated within the proposed construction and surface treatments.
Correct, yes, we've been working through that with them, and particularly the weight is less of an issue than the width of getting through and making sure there's space for them, and we've worked through that on the basis of both the equipment that they have now and the stuff that's coming.
Okay, and then another question in a similar vein is that there are a number of buildings along those blocks that are quite old and will need updating and renovated or even rebuilt. And so essentially also the ability for further construction to take place as need be, and the ability to bring cranes, etc., in, and the movement of the furniture or the layout of the road.
Yes, I'm confident that that will be able to be achieved. There's actually quite a bit more space as a result for them to do that compared to what we have at the moment. So there may actually be more opportunities for them to do that and not require things like road closures. So we're actually hoping that it will be a positive for the buildings in that sense.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have further questions, but I'll let the rotation continue.
Leave your hand up. That's helpful. Thank you. Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just picking up on a question that has been asked about the parking network and how we consider it more broadly than the mapped area that's affected by this project. And we have accepted for implementation a set of recommendations from MR Cagney around a wider parking plan, and just because we know that that is going to be imperative to making sure that this works as well as it can in this area. So just checking for an update as to when we might anticipate seeing something brought back to council looking at implementing those recommendations.
Mr. Drew, do you have an answer?
I do. I just checked in with the team then. They've just had the initiation meeting with MR Cagney today. So that work has just started looking at the technology aspects and some of the wayfinding. And we expect some early results out of that work by about June of this year.
Some of the recommendations are policy decisions, though, not necessarily infrastructure projects around the allocation of resource.
But Your Worship, I'll follow up with Mr. Drew and provide an update on timing following the meeting.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 questions, and it just repeats of yesterday. With the Knox block and curb and channeling, is it the basalt channels that are on page 118 that are proposed to be there? I guess my question really relates to, will wheelchair access be available up and down the street based on the current curb and channel design, or can we try to modify that design to allow that to happen? That's that question.
Sorry, my bad. I'm not very good at the mouse.
I was just waiting for my trusty sidekick to unmute me. That is a more traditional curb and channel configuration in that block, and so there will be fewer opportunities, but we are increasing the opportunity for crossing the road, but we are increasing those opportunities from what are available at the moment. Unless you just take yourself in your own hands and cross at any point, there's sort of 2 points where we're looking at the mid-block crossing. Our biggest challenge in that area for achieving more crossing points is the number of driveways that we have and the desire to retain as much parking as possible. So it's very much a juggling act in each of the blocks as to how we can get all of those things to fit together, which is why we're sort of taking a little bit more time with that one to work through those issues.
I guess it's the bigger picture question of providing universal design and universal access to people in wheelchairs, and our traditional curb and channel designs, and whether or not, in fact, we could use this block to look at them. I'm always bringing up, but it's, I'm struck by the lower octagon, which probably has the biggest challenge of ever getting water to run in the right direction. It doesn't have a curb and channel on it.
I agree that the one issue that's slightly different here is that we will have traffic going in both directions still through the Knox block. So we need to just ensure that those crossing points are a bit more developed than maybe ones that we'd require in a place with only traffic going in a single direction.
Could be a person parking their car who's a paraplegic who then gets into the wheelchair. So that's, I guess, anyway, we don't need to go backwards and forwards too much more on that.
Absolutely. I'll take that on board.
And the next question I have is, you've mentioned the bollards, and it came up yesterday as well. Are they all the way up to Albany Street? Could the Knox block also be shut off? There's a lot of eateries in that area, or do they start further down?
Currently, I believe they start at that 5-way intersection, but that's something I can certainly look at. I think there's more challenge with that 5-way intersection, but certainly the block in the Knox block, maybe from Albany to that 5-way intersection, that could be a possibility. So I'll look at that as well.
Cool. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wesley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, Dr. Hazelton, nice to see you. And also my apologies for missing the workshop yesterday, just due to other commitments that I had on. Now, I've got a couple of questions around the green space down the street there. So noting that 30% of the greenery that'll be through there will be exotic. So am I correct in assuming that that's going to be the existing exotic trees that are down George Street?
Kia ora, Rachel, thank you. Good to see you. Unfortunately, no, the trees that we have existing in the street will be removed progressively as we work through the project, not all at once. Partly that's because the conditions that they were planted into are now meaning that they weren't constrained, and many have got into the pipes. Many are also struggling, not all are in the healthiest state. And many are now actually of a size where they're causing quite a few problems for the buildings around them. So we will continue to have some deciduous trees in the area, because obviously keeping that light in there during winter is really important. But we will be basically replacing all of the trees through the area. The positive news, if there is any positive news in that, is that we have worked with the Otago Woodturners Guild, and they will be taking that timber, and so it will be put to use.
Oh, kia ora, that's really good to hear. I quite like the sound of that. And then that relates to the second question I have, where I also note in the report around mana whenua providing input into the selection of native species with the aspiration of bringing native bird life back to the centre of the city. So I'm just keen to know if there's going to be any other sort of expertise brought into that to facilitate a planned approach to bringing back that native bird life.
So the team that's worked on this, there are obviously the landscape architects involved with that as well, and it's quite specialised expertise in that area. But I can look further at whether there's anything else we can do in terms of that. I know that the council, we have other teams that are involved in trying to bring back more native plantings across the city to ensure we have, pockets and islands that they can move through. So I can ensure that that's part of that conversation.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Hazelton.
Councillor Laufiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chairman, tēnā koutou, Dr. Hazelton and the Okaha and the O3 team for your excellent mahi and perseverance in the face of adversity. I have two questions and they relate to the section on page 65, starting with headed movement and parking. And I'm just clarifying that the crimson coloured things, are they loading bays for couriers?
Yes, correct.
Okay, and my second question follows up on Councillor Elders and the Mayor's concerns about parking. What constrains us from offering more disability mobility parks?
From a technical point of view, we just have to make sure that we can put those parks in places that we can get the length required, and that the ramps, etc., don't put people who are using those parks in danger.
Okay.
There has been some pushback in the past, including more recently in a meeting that I was in, where it was questioned why we should provide those by a business, and so that's the only other pushback we tend to get, but mostly technical, and we can provide a lot more in the new design.
Okay, and is there, sorry, Mr. Chair, for a third question, is there room to create another class of parking for mobile people over 65 and over, and parents of young children and babies?
Can I throw that to Mr. Drew?
Sure, thank you.
So I believe there is already an over 70.
I think that's it's a pass for free parking, but I don't think it's parking spaces that are specific.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Raddick.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions looking at the curbing and channeling and the drainage associated with that. A lot of the current mud tank drain gratings are longitudinal cast iron structures, and wheelchair wheels occasionally fall into those. Is there any mitigation measures for that planned for the street?
It's correct. So you'll notice actually currently we're already putting in a new style of grate that is cycle and wheelchair friendly in the enabling works. It's one that's been adopted across the city. Mr. Drew might want to comment further on that, but we have started putting those in the enabling works already.
Great. So the drainage system, will it be able to handle the occasional very heavy downpours we get without curb and channeling? Because Mr. Councillor O'Malley made reference to water running free through the octagon or down the lower octagon.
Correct. We have done quite a lot of modelling in this space. That's a key issue that we know that we have to resolve as part of this project related to the three waters aspect, is ensuring that our stormwater system is fit for purpose and that we can handle those increasing heavy rain events. And that is part of the design, certainly through things like the rain gardens, gathering water, making sure we've upgraded some of the sizes of the pipes under, and more redundancy in the network through this area.
Great. And lastly, in the set of curb and channeling questions, one of the things that curb and channeling does do in places is protect shop fronts from ram raids, and we see now ram raids becoming a feature on the New Zealand crime scene, unfortunately. What ram raid mitigation measures have been discussed or are there already in the plan?
So we haven't specifically looked at the issue of ram raids, but the issue that we have been looking at is where you might have, which would be the same as a ram raid really, where you might have someone that accidentally, as they're coming into a car park, hits the accelerator instead of the brake and fires off towards the window. So what we've been looking at in that is ensuring that we've either got other types of barriers in between. So that might be in some places bollards, and other places it might be, you know, the furniture or tree protection, to ensure that there aren't really any spaces where that could easily happen. But I'll take that to check that through again with the design team as we work through the detailed design.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I think everyone who wanted to ask a question has asked one or more. So we'll go on to our next round. Councillor Lord.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Now, I remember what my question was, Dr. Hazelton. It was to do with lime scooters and the geo-fencing them out of areas. I just feel in an area like this where we're trying to create a really user-friendly space, they may not be the best tool in that area, and you know, people jump off them and just they sit there and they fall over and they accumulate in heaps. I'm just wondering what your thoughts were. Would we have them geo-fenced out of the area, or would you expect that they would carry through and maybe some way be restricted to the car lanes only, or how would you imagine that happening?
At this stage, the discussions we've had and positive discussions with the provider is around allowing them to still transfer through the area, because we are trying to encourage people to be able to, you know, go through the area in a range of different ways, and to ensure that people are safe. But doing things like making sure that we have, currently they provide some incentives, for example, around if you return them to a specific docking area, your ride is cheaper. Also making sure that we have clearly demarcated areas for those to be left, and that might be alongside areas that are already set aside for cycle parking, for example. So it's something that we can continue to look at as the use of the area evolves. But at this stage, it's very much that we would like them to still be in the area, but along with all of the other modes of transport, sharing with care and taking responsibility.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderbus.
Dr. Hazelton, you've said that a through route is not the desired use of George Street. Given that the vast majority of annual plan submitters and a $6,500 petition, 6,500 people petition, were opposed to the Central City upgrade, and given the number of people that do use George Street as a through route, where do you get this idea that it's not a desired use of George Street? Who is not desiring it when the people obviously do?
In that respect, I was talking about the cyclists not using it as a through route, Councillor.
No, that's not the case. You were talking about specifically, you went on to talk about cyclists, and you said not what we want through this space, but you were talking specifically about cars and the fact that traffic is now only one way and in one direction. I would like you to answer the question, who is it that is not desired the current two-way through route for vehicular traffic?
So Dr. Hazelton did answer your question, Councillor. His comment referred to it not being desirable for cyclists to make it a through route. That's what he said, and that's what his comment related to.
Are you saying that it's not to be used by it's not to be used as a through route by cars because of the cyclist requirement?
No, Dr. Hazelton's comments related to cyclists.
Well, that was not what I heard, and I think if you look back at the video, you'll find it's not the case. I would still like his comment on why it is that we are getting a 10-kilometre an hour one way through a street that the vast majority of annual plan submitters didn't want, that a 6,500 person petition didn't want, and that an awful lot of people every day obviously want to use that as a through route for cars. Why is it that that's not happening now?
Because we're responding to the council resolution.
Thank you.
Right. And the council resolution flew in the face of all the feedback we had. Okay, thank you for that.
You've had an answer to your question, Councillor. We'll go back to people who've had one go. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. My next question relates to, I guess, children's entertainment on the, or next two questions on George Street. The first one is just around the playground, and I see there's a concept design there, and I'm very happy to see that, but I'm also have had feedback concern around safety. So I just wonder if you can expand a little bit more on what might be happening with the playground, please.
There's still work to be done in resolving exactly how that will be laid out. For example, at the moment in the plans, we've already made some changes to switch the side of the playground so that there's a barrier between the playground, a clearer barrier between the playground and the road. And the exact equipment that we'll have in there, we're still working through with some, some people more knowledgeable about that than myself.
That's great, thank you. My next question relates to, obviously George Street is used for parades, the graduation parades, and for the Santa parade. And I have, which I think Councillor O'Malley drove the van with the albatross behind, and we had to have a little challenge getting through with the wingspan. So I wonder if you've talked to the people who run the Santa parade to see if the floats will fit down the main street.
I think that's something that I'll have to look into again. I think that with the road, the lane width and the buffer zone that we have should be sufficient, but I will check that as well. I don't know what the wingspan of the albatross is in the Santa Parade, but I'll check into that.
We did hit a tree last time, so it's quite wide.
Thank you. Dr. Hazelton, I've got a question about the infrastructure. There's been a discussion, I know, about the repair and replacement of laterals where necessary in addition to the other services. Is it still the case that the council has made a policy decision to pick up the cost of the lateral connections where appropriate?
Yes, that is correct.
Excellent, thank you very much. Back to Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a couple of questions, and yes, notably albatross wings are rather wide, and you don't want wings falling off. There's one of the concerns people had was actually because there's no buses going through there now and not so many cars, is the safety at night, late at night, early in the morning, particularly for young women, and young men, for people on the street at night, just the safety aspect of that and how that is being dealt with.
So there's a couple of different avenues for that. One is that definitely the lighting that we have in the area is insufficient at the moment. So there will be increased lighting, and that lighting will be more directed to avoid light spill, so that it is actually hitting the areas that need to be lit. Linking back to one of the previous answers, I'd also say that one of the pieces of advice or guidance that we'll be looking at putting in that pack for businesses and building owners in the area is looking at the lighting underneath their verandas, for example, because we think that could also help with making it a more attractive place to shop, ensuring that that lighting is there. And we are still looking at the issue of CCTV in the area as well.
Oh, thank you for that, because that's, when you're out late at night, there is a concern. The other question I had was to do with mobility, actually, and distances people can travel, and the concern about people have loved that ODT April Fool's joke of a tram, but just the idea of a loop bus so that people can access further down the street, get on and get off, and go to the library and the Octagon and other places, just because for some people that mobility is an issue.
I hadn't realised it was an April Fool's joke. I thought it was something else I had to put into the plan.
People loved it.
I know. So yes, there are a number of issues that we have had voiced very clearly through the engagement, and that we entirely recognise around that access from the bus hub. a couple of things. One is that in the area that we are working, it is predominantly north of that. So our area kind of at the moment stops at Moray Place, but we are looking at, that kind of Moray Place, Octagon, Lower Stewart Street will be a future design area, and that will be something that we certainly take into consideration then. The routing of the buses is obviously an ORC issue. And that's one that I'd have to defer to them to have that conversation. But where we can in the area, we're trying to make some improvements around those accesses out. So in particular, St. Andrew Street, for example, there's quite a horrible cross gradient on the street there. And that was raised, for people that are leaving the bus hub, getting up to George Street, that does make it quite difficult. So in an area like that, we are working to reduce that gradient of crossfall, and also placing things like seating partway up that block, so that if people do need to stop and rest, they can do that. The other one that is currently out with a bit of engagement, and it will be interesting to see how this one falls, is the opportunity to put additional bus stops adjacent to Albion Lane in Great King Street, so that would then give further accessibility for people on buses using Great King Street to get back to George Street, reducing some of that distance. That does, however, as I said previously, all of these things, we've got a set amount of road space, and this is trying to work who can have which part of that. So that would involve the removal of some parking in that area. So there's currently engagement with businesses in the area about that. And we'll have to see what that feedback looks like.
Thank you. That's my two questions.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Dr. Hazelton, earlier you mentioned that, or the Chief mentioned that work commences on the 26th of April. Can you expand upon what work will take place ongoing from the 26th of April?
So the 26th of April is the date that we're looking at starting the George Street Farmers Block. Obviously, we'll be continuing with parts of the enabling works as well, but that is when the George Street work starts. And that will be starting with the replacement of underground infrastructure, and then working through the replacement of the above ground infrastructure as that commences.
So will that block be closed off then?
Correct, yes.
Okay. A question, I guess, for Mr. Drew then. Then understanding that, then Frederick Street will still be closed, London Street will still be closed, Philell Street will still be closed, and a part of Hanover Street will still be closed. Will that be correct?
I think Dr. Hazelton can answer that.
Okay, thank you.
So we're looking, so by that time we'll be getting close to having most of those other streets open, and we will have London is open already. Frederick Street is very close to being reopened, at least for traffic. Hanover Philell will still be closed, and then it will just be the George Street block as well.
Okay. Are they still just going to be working single shift? And having a lot of downtime and work not happening, or is there an ability to increase to a double shift so the work can be sped through a little bit faster?
Yes, so the teams are not working single shifts at the moment. There is actually quite a bit of work that does happen at night, particularly with water cutovers, etc. But we haven't been able to fully get as much double shifting into the areas we're in at the moment. One, because in Frederick Street we have the Cancer Society nearby with their hostel, so we don't want to be interrupting those people convalescing in the evenings. And then the other areas of London, Philell, Hanover, we have a motel, a hotel, and large amounts of residential accommodation. So when we have done longer times, either after about 7 o'clock at night or at weekends, I can assure you that the next day my inbox is full of complaints. So we've been doing this as a very much a targeted approach, that where we can, we will absolutely be doing longer shifts or double shifting, but where it's not appropriate for residents around it, then we won't do that. For example, on the upcoming George Street one, we've only got 3 apartments in that block. So there's a greater potential there to do that, working in collaboration with those people.
Okay, through the chair, can I just ask one more additional question in that vein?
Go for it.
Dr. Hazelton, I've consistently asked through different times about are we notifying all building owners and where we can, tenants and even the property management companies of this work going forward? So anybody signing a lease for 2023 will not be surprised of any construction happening in front of them, and that there will be very much awareness of that. They're signing up to a flat or an apartment in a proposed construction zone to reduce your complaint level.
Yeah, so we've got a letter that is going, I hoped it would have gone out this week, but unfortunately the assistant that was helping me has COVID. So we'll go out next week, which is going out to all legally established apartments that we know of, the owners of those, out to all of the agents that are involved in letting as best as we know for George Street, and to current residents, letting them know that over the next coming years we have work going on in the area. Appreciate their flexibility on that, noting that we do have to work at night at times, and that by doing so it will help us accelerate the program. The one thing I will say is that we have had challenges getting to all of the apartment dwellers, because often these are apartments with large numbers of people, and while one person might get the letter, others don't. And also our approaches through snail mail have not always been successful. We've had quite a few cases where people have said, oh, I haven't been notified of such and such. And when we ask them to check in their mailbox, they realise they do have a mailbox, and they find that the letter is still there. So that's where the whole work around trying to ensure people know that this project is going on through the Totally George's campaign is also meant to just ensure that people do ask the question before they rent an apartment, and that we hope that their letting agents and their owners will disclose that information, that they do know that work is coming up.
Appreciate the answer to that. And through the chair, I still have further questions asked, but I'll let the rotation continue.
Leave your hand up. Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 questions. I'm not sure for whom. Just because the spectre of closed circuit television has been raised, maybe for Ms. Graham, would the expansion of the CCTV network be a decision you would think be delegated to staff at an operational level, or would it be something that would be considered by council?
I would assume that that would be an operational decision.
Okay, my second question is what next? Given that there was a considerable amount of time gone into the planning of this section of the Central City Plan, but it is part of a bigger thing. When would we anticipate a discussion around which bit gets redesigned next?
We're having those discussions at the minute, and I would expect we will bring something to council or committee, depending on where's appropriate. When would you think, Dr. Hazelton?
How many have we got before the election?
Yeah, it may make it in this triennium, or maybe after the end of the triennium, but possibly this year.
Right, but certainly not we're not anticipating being able to, just from a pipeline of work point of view, carry on when the construction of this section is done, or is that the goal?
That is the goal,
okay.
But it's the order hasn't been finalised yet, because there's a range of considerations, including some other infrastructure work that has to be done, and just making sure that we do it in the least disruptive and most efficient way.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Raddick.
Thank you. I'm just wondering how will graduations go with such a narrow laneway compared to what we have currently?
The actual area there is suitable for it, I believe, and we're working with the university through our events team, who have those constant contacts to ensure that it will work, and will offer a good experience for those cheering on the graduates as well. It may just mean that they take a little bit longer to get down the road.
Yeah, well, they just string out a bit longer.
Yeah,
that's fine. Further to Councillor Elder's question, we have seen, given there's a great many young folk walk along the street at night, and we have seen a much higher rate of late night assaults and street crime in the likes of Cuba Street. What rate do you think late night assaults will rise to here in Dunedin?
The opposite.
I don't think they will rise. I'm not in control of all of the other socioeconomic factors that go into why assaults might be rising. But I think with the increased lighting, the potential for CCTV, the increased nighttime economy, we would hope that that will actually, that's a key part of crime prevention through design, which is a key lens we have over the project.
So your expectation is that there will be an increase in nighttime economy?
Absolutely.
Restaurants, I presume, or something else as well?
I think particularly with restaurants, particularly with the expanded space that we have there, but we have had a number of other businesses talking about, after seeing plans, about opportunities in the area.
Thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering this is probably a question for Dr. Hazelton, if businesses were asked if they wanted the trees in front of their businesses, then obviously it looks like by the pictures, those trees and that grassy verge around them are taking away car parks. Did they have the option of a car park or a tree? Was that offered to them or not?
No, not in that way, Councillor, because trying to ensure that we could get the same amount of car parks in the block as we have currently, as well as accommodating all of the access ways, etc., and making sure that they can be safely entered and exited, means that there's limited places where we can put them, and those are the best locations we can get them in safely. But as I noted earlier, those numbers are the same as what we have now.
The reason why I make that comment is about maybe a year ago, I went down and visited businesses in South Dunedin, and many of them complained to me about these pull-out areas that have been created in front of their business where they'd put a tree. And they said, look, we could have 2 car parks here, and they were quite irate about it. And also the area itself was quite unkept. They said no one's come to do anything with it. There was dirt, there was cigarette butts in it. How can we guarantee that? Sorry?
Question, please.
I'm just about to say it. How can we guarantee that council will upkeep these, these areas, that they'll even look good? Because it hasn't happened in other parts of our city.
So as part of the work that the design team are doing at the moment, they're also developing a maintenance specification for what we need to do, how regularly, etc. And we're working through that with our teams. That's something that I was involved many, many years ago when I first joined council with that South Dunedin project. And that is one of the things that I will say that wasn't a mission at the time, is that we didn't have that buy-in from other teams, and that we didn't have good systems in place to ensure that those things were taken on and looked after properly, and that we knew what the level of uptake was. Now we do have that in place.
Oh, that's great to hear, because we have had some issues with verges and grassy areas all over the city not being done, or not being done as well as people would like. But certainly I know in South Dunedin, the trees, if you look at them, they've got a whole lot of rubbish in them. They really looked run down and they looked messy. And the issue for them was that car parks could have gone there instead of a tree that was looking really messy. So if a business sees this plan and says, oh, I'd rather have a car park outside my business than a tree, can they change that? Do they have that option?
Unfortunately not, because it's not quite as easy as just doing that. But as I'll just reiterate that there's the same number of parks in each block as we promised before.
What can I ask why it isn't, easy to do that?
I explained that before, that we have to ensure that you can safely access those car parks. There has to be certain distances from many areas, like, when you're coming out of driveways, etc., out of those blocks. Intersections, distances from those, crossing distances, making sure that people can be safely seen as they're crossing in front or behind. So it's not just as easy to plonk them down as just choosing where you want them exactly. But we've tried as best as possible to get a good spread through all of the blocks, so that if you don't have one outside you, hopefully there's one just across the road from you.
Right.
I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pretty dumb question, but it emanates again from voluminous social media feedback. So an answer might give some reassurance. Dr. Hazelton, can you, I mean, it goes to the artist's impressions, the interpretations. Can you just assure us that these visuals are just interpretations, and the final version will not just be welcoming young, good-looking people who ride helmetless, ancient-looking bikes?
Yes, correct. They are just visual representations, and obviously a lot of those renders use relatively stock standard imagery of people. I'm hoping that it isn't just that small group of people that can, otherwise I won't be there either.
And if I could, Chair, I'm able to answer Councillor Walker's previous question now about what the cost would be of replacing, of what we would need to do to remediate the surface if we just put it back following the infrastructure replacement. So to replace existing asphalt curb and channel in the George Street blocks would be about $12 million at this.
Thank you.
Good, great, I was spot on, thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates a little bit to Councillor Gary's question, which was about the interpretation and the storytelling. I just want to check that you are intersecting with Enterprise Dunedin, who are doing work on product development and the destination plan, which I think is coming to council in a couple of weeks. And I just wanted to make sure, obviously, as this is an important visit to destination, that that was part of the work.
Yes, that's correct. We're working closely with them.
And is there any funding available to help with that work?
We have some funding set aside through this project to do that, but we may seek others from other sources as well. I know that through our early conversations, there'd been quite a bit of eagerness from some of the other heritage organisations around the city, if not being able to contribute money-wise, to at least be able to contribute time and through their energy and through their research.
That's fantastic to hear. Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Just following up on what the CEO has just said around the budget. Dr. Hazelton, we're talking $28 million for the work for the treatments through George Street. Is $32 million out of that $60 million budget enough to do the rest of the treatments around the city that we put into the long-term plan in 2018?
I think the main thing you'd note from that is that that inflation is running quite high. So I would say we are going to be pushed to do that across the rest of the city. Also acknowledging that the Octagon was one of the areas that wasn't funded in that as well. So I think that will be a question in future for council again to consider.
Yep, no, I totally appreciate that. Thank you. On page 20 of our papers, at the bottom, it talks about engagement. And it says engagement has occurred on the project through many forums. Has there been good attendance, and have the retailers and building owners been well represented in those engagement sessions?
Obviously, this is something that's been going on for nigh on a decade now in terms of the engagement and through a range of different ways. The most recent that I can comment on is the most recent engagement that we either have had through the Central City Advisory Group, particularly feeding into the detailed business case, which is what you considered back in September, and into the construction reference group, which we established. The attendance hasn't been as good as I would have liked. I think partly that is we've had challenges, obviously, with COVID. People are focused elsewhere at the moment. And some of the people that we have had into the groups haven't turned up as much as I would have hoped that we would, and then thus not distributed that as far as we can. What we can do now, I think, though, is most of the focus of people that we've had approach us recently is predominantly around the construction issues, rather than the decision that council made last year, because the construction is the most pressing issues for them. And in that engagement, we're getting much better uptake. But particularly when we go just door to door and talk to people, that seems to be the best way. Time consuming as it may be, the best way.
Yeah, just in follow up. So in the last 6 months, I'm trying to be specific on, and has this plan been workshopped with many of those people that had been previously engaged with and their feedback? And have there been, is it like over 10 or is it less than 10 or 20, 30?
No, so these plans specifically have not been, because they've come out of the detailed business case workshops that we did all of the work around that, and then this has gone to take all of that previous information and define it into a design. It becomes difficult at this stage to get much past a design by committee type situation when you do have it too broad. So certainly there's wriggle room, but what I would say is that over the last 10 years, the feedback we've had has been very similar around what people want and what people don't want, and very much so around people have contested visions of this street, and we're never going to be able to satisfy everyone. Everyone is passionate about this place, but everyone has a slightly different idea on how to achieve that. And I know that we're never going to please everyone.
Yeah, totally appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you. 2 questions. The first question is, I had 4 children, and going down the street with 4 children is quite a busy time. And my concern really is just around the boundary between the street and the cars. And if I'm a mama, I want to say you can't go beyond that point. Is there clear delineation so that mamas can say, or daddies can say, you can't go beyond this line because it's dangerous?
Mm-hmm. The clearest space that you'll be able to do that is exactly the same point that it really is now, which is your veranda line. That space is the most, the safest space for pedestrians. Moving out beyond that space, you do need to have more attention, because there will be car parking in some of that area, just as there is today, and then there will be vehicles moving through it. So the safest area is that dedicated pedestrian area from the building to the veranda line.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's just telling you've got to have a wee story or narrative to keep your children in line. And the other question was, the report was out yesterday, and lovely pictures and descriptions of the streetscape, which look rather beautiful. I was just wondering if you'd had any feedback from the shop owners about the actual visuals of what it would look like. That was all. I mean, it's a short time.
Yeah, and I directly a wee bit, and I guess at this stage I've mostly heard from more of the positive people than I heard the negative. I know the negative though are vocal in their areas, but for my own mental health and sanity, I try not to spend too much time on social media.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Hawkins.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-up question from Councillor Elder, who's concerned about the conflict between users. Is the intention of the space not to be ambiguous and not so clearly delineated, and not to have a hard line whereby people aren't supposed to cross because that is space for cars?
To a degree, correct. Yes, it is about more ensuring that is a shared space, and because it is a low speed environment, you're more able to do that. But we are still trying to delineate areas where you can be more certain as a pedestrian, as a parent, as someone in a wheelchair, for example, that you won't be experiencing that conflict. So that is that real pedestrian zone that we're trying to clear between the buildings and that veranda line. Beyond that, absolutely, there is more opportunity to share that space, but there are some areas where we want to be very clear on this is for pedestrians only.
Thank you. Councillor Raddick.
Thank you. If harking back to an earlier question from Councillor Fiso, I'm wondering about in the Golden Block, which is arguably it's got the most and busiest shops in the street currently. Why are there only 2 loading parks?
I'll just reassure that at the moment, we're still working through the exact delineation of what those parks will be. That is still open for question. And I would say that while the designers have given us some recommendations over that parking, we'll be relying more heavily on our transport team to ensure that we get that mix right.
Thank you. So I presume that explains the discrepancy between page 65 and page 101, where there is a difference between numbers and location of loading zones, but
Correct.
also, yes, but also of mobility parks. Now, to my observation, the loading zones are used quite a lot more than mobility parks in my observation of the streetscape of Dunedin. But also they tend to be used at different times. So loading zones come under high usage mornings and afternoons when stuff is needing to be shipped, and mobility parks used through the middle of the day when people want to come shopping. So my question is this: has that degree of usage been researched? And it seems to me we could easily make, at the moment the loading zones are called authorized zones. Why not combine the two so that instead of a specific mobility park, you call them all authorized zones? So for instance, on the page 65, where there are 4 mobility parks and 2 loading parks, you'd have 6 authorized parks. And what that would mean is that any mobility parker could park in any authorized zone and any authorized park, and vice versa. And so that would give more access to both categories of vehicle. And as I suggested, they're not entirely at the same time frame. So that would mean more accessibility for all. And similarly, then it could be considered, as Councillor Fiso suggested, to widen that group depending on the usage of those parks, those authorised parks, and to see if there's sufficient unutilised time that the use of those authorised zones could be increased to a wider demographic. So has that ever been looked at, researched, discussed, whatever?
So I'll answer in part and then defer in part. Yes, that is something that I've been talking about with our transport team as a broader discussion across the city, and that will be part of that parking management that will come back to council, particularly in terms of, I know that you're talking with staff in that area, that we do have quite a complex array of different time allocations, different uses, etc. And there could be work to make that more legible and to discuss some of those options like you have suggested there. So that's something I know.
Will I see you later, or are you going out?
Councillor Barker, you're not on mute.
Sorry.
Don't worry.
Have a good evening.
Hopefully I'm going out.
Okay.
I think I'll need to after this.
Just for people's information, we're just about at the end of questions by the look of the lack of hands. I'd like to go. Are you finished, Councillor Raddick, or not?
No, I've just got a couple more. But
Right.
I was going to do a second round because I see Councillor Hoolan's got her hand up. But thank you very much, Dr. Hazelton, for that answer. Thank you.
Right. Well, I'll go to Councillor. Why don't you do your 2 now, and then we'll finish off with Councillor Houlihan.
Okay. So have the retailers been shown these plans already? Just like...
Not yet, no. This is where that launch came from, is that we wanted to ensure the councillors had seen them first before they went out public.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm concerned that, they're, pretty integral to the whole thing. And
question, please.
Yep. Thank you. So who is this design intended for, if not for the shops and the shoppers?
I think it's intended that we're trying to create, as I said before, I guess, what it comes back to is this is a balancing act between lots of different interests. We have a set amount of road space and we have an increasingly diverse population and an increasingly growing number of ways that people want to use space. And what we're trying to do here is balance as best as we can and find some compromises between those groups. And if I hark back to some of the conversations I've had with people, and these are very difficult conversations that we have. It's not a fun part of the role all the time when you're dealing with this. What I would say is, as I was trying to discuss it with a friend of mine, at one end of the spectrum, through all of the consultation that I've been involved with over the last 10 to 15 years, we've had people who want to fully pedestrianise George Street. The other end of the spectrum, we have people who don't want to pedestrianise George Street. And I think by undertaking this plan that the council asked, went for a one-way with the retained parking, I think we're trying to do the best to compromise that we possibly can between those different groups. I see it particularly in the conversations that we've had so far, as a lot of it is generational. That younger people want something different from this space, and we're trying to accommodate that, given that this will last for hopefully 20 to 30 years. I certainly won't be here to do this again. That some of those people will be tomorrow's shoppers as well as today's shoppers. So we're trying to balance the needs of those we are having there today and those who are going to want to use the space more in future. And it is very difficult. It's not something that doesn't keep me awake at night. I can assure you of that. I've not had a lot of sleep over the last couple of months.
Yes, I do appreciate the great task you've had. Thank you, Dr. Hazelton. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Houlihan. And after your hopefully limited number of questions, I'm going to suggest that we have a break for 10 minutes so people can get a cup of coffee or something before we actually go to the noting motion. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Chair. And on that note, I'd like to thank Dr. Hazelton, because he is probably our best advocate in the council for engaging with people and is known for being very, very good at that. So thank you so much for all the work that you've been doing with this, because it's not an easy job. It's been the most contentious thing that we've had in council over my term.
You can do that in your debating speech, please.
That's fine. I just wanted to acknowledge, because the well-being of, and so on that, since we're talking about well-being, have you got, given you're engaging with the businesses, have you got any idea at the moment what the well-being is of the business owners around the fact, some of them, that the disruptions are going to be starting and others that have already started? How are they feeling at the moment?
It's certainly tough times. We acknowledge that. It's really difficult given, we've had multiple years of COVID lockdown. We've now got war in Ukraine, rising oil prices, rising inflation, mortgage rates, etc., etc. And it is a very challenging environment. What we're trying to do through the work that we're doing, particularly in the marketing space, is to look at how we can encourage people to come back into the city, because this is not just a simple equation of build it and they will come. We have changed our behaviours, and as a community, we need to be supporting those local businesses. It's it's cognizant on all of us to get back. And I'm just as guilty as the next person of occasionally buying things online when I could have probably gone into a shop and done it. And more than ever, that is important to do that. I had a very sobering conversation with a business in the farmers block who is actually an advocate for the change taking place, and they're looking forward to it. But they were kind enough to share their financials with me. And it is difficult out there, and we understand that, and we're doing everything we possibly can to make sure we get through that work as quickly as we possibly can, and that we can do as many things as possible to reduce that burden. And on that, and one of the things that we have been discussing this morning is rejigging some of that program to ensure, so we're constantly taking that feedback and looking at how we can refine that.
That's what I was going to ask. That was my next question, is that what can we do then to help? What do they need right now?
I think from my perspective, and this is only a personal perspective, is that I think the biggest thing that we can do that we haven't done as a city, and I'm not saying as a council, but I'm saying as a city, is that we don't market the central city like other places do. If you look at places like Auckland and heart of the city up there, they do amazing campaign work over seasons to get people in there, to encourage people to come shop. We don't have a body that currently does that independent of council. And the marketing that takes place on a very ad hoc basis. The malls do a bit. Yeah. I hear a bit from some of the smaller businesses out there doing a little bit online, but there isn't a lot. And so I think the biggest thing that we can do is really encourage, and that would be, my hope is to pull together a bit of a partnership with other organizations to really do a drive around, get back into the city, come and do your shopping, come and support your local businesses. And I think now that we're moving into that orange setting, I'm hoping that it happens more. I certainly know that my wallet is taking a bit of a hammering lately, trying to support as many as I can.
Some councils around the country, I think it's Wellington, I read the other day, have acknowledged the tough, time that their businesses have had with them not, people not being in the CBD, they're working from home. And of course, ours have that and the disruption with this upgrade, which is not our fault, but it's just unfortunate the timing has happened. Is it time that we offered our businesses some financial support?
Question for staff.
That's not currently part of the plan, but as Dr. Hazelton has said, there are a range of initiatives we are looking to do to support business, and both Dr. Hazelton and Mr. Christie and his teams are working actively with businesses and will continue to do so. I think he's mentioned we've got marketing campaigns, activations, we're trying to time the work as best we can. We're doing everything we can to support the businesses, knowing that there are some factors that we simply don't control: COVID, inflation, the war.
All right, let's leave it there. So you've had an hour and a half of questions, and I think that's been very thorough and useful. I'll move that we adjourn for, is 10 minutes enough? Yes. I'll move that we adjourn until 4:10. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor O'Malley. Those in favour, please say aye. That's agreed. Paul, would you take us off the live stream until 4:10, please? Thank you very much. We'll just wait till we make sure we have everyone back on deck. Councillor Elder is still cuddling her grandchild. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. That's all elected members that are coming, I think. All right, well, let's get underway. As you heard, the Mayor has intimated that he wishes to move, and Mr. Ellison has asked to second. So I've also had a request from Councillor Barker, who has got to drive someone to cuddle some penguins, to speak early. So I'll take a call from her early on. She unfortunately can't stay for the vote, but we'll be able to sway whatever direction she wishes passionately. So, Your Worship, the floor is yours. I'll monitor the 5 minutes. I'll give you a warning at 1 minute. Should you go past 4, and we'll take it from there. Mayor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My understanding is that I have 10, but I won't avail myself.
Oh, as mover, yes.
Of all of that, I promise. Thank you, and thanks, colleagues, for the questions and discussion. This is a really exciting point in what is a transformational project for our centre city, and it's taken us a while to get here. This is more than 10 years in the discussion and planning, but that's nothing compared to waiting 150 years, which is how long our mana whenua have waited to be visible in this way, in this part of the city. And I want to acknowledge that patience and perseverance up front. And it's great to see how well this has been received by the community over the past couple of days since it has been made public, but none so obviously as seeing the pride of our young rangatahi Māori leaders and finally seeing something of themselves in our environment. And this has taken time, a little longer than perhaps some of us would like, but I think we've got a better outcome because it has taken this long. And I can't imagine us having the papers that we have in front of us today had we been having this discussion even 3 or 5 years ago, and so sometimes it is worth it. This project is what it looks like when we have when we see an integrated strategic framework in action on a project. I mean, there are economic benefits here in terms of ensuring the vibrancy and enduring viability for business in the city centre. Social well-being outcomes and creating a meeting place and a social space for people, arts and culture outcomes, both from a fixed work and performance opportunity point of view. And I want to acknowledge and thank the design team for their inclusion of reference to the UNESCO City of Literature. And as a side note, thanks for making me feel old and realizing that at some point I'm going to have to explain to my son what late night shopping means, because that is something that's necessarily that common in our current parlance. There are environmental wellbeing outcomes through both the biodiversity and zero carbon work programs and parks and recreational ones in providing opportunities for people to be walking and playing in our city centre, underpinned in its entirety by the principles of sustainability and the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. And more recently, we've been focused a lot on partnership as far as those principles go, but this is as much as anything else about protection and preserving and promoting our cultural values and telling our stories in our built environment, which we couldn't do as effectively, I don't think, without strong partnership in the development of this work. Quality of life is a big topic right now, particularly in the context of New Zealand's borders reopening and cities up and down the Motu are concerned about what might happen to our best and brightest people when other opportunities are presented to them. And in that context, this work is incredibly important because what those people, those who have the luxury of choosing where they live and work, what they expect to see in their cities increasingly in the 21st century are exactly the kinds of spaces that we are about to create here in Dunedin. That is an inclusive and accessible city centre that is a destination, not a thoroughfare, a destination for everyone. And we've talked about what that means in terms of people being able to see themselves in the built environment. It's things like people in wheelchairs or people with mobility issues having the freedom to be able to go where they choose, as opposed to having to make it to an intersection or a mid-block crossing to get where they need to get to. For parents who just need a break, and the prevalence of seating and drinking fountains and play spaces is welcome. But overall, just for people to be able to spend time and yes, money in our city centre. And it is obviously an urban design project and a transport project being laid over the top of a water infrastructure project, but it's also equally important in what it offers us as a history project. And the design decisions that we have before us today have a significant backstory. It is a vast body of work that accompanies the pictures that people are getting excited about. And I certainly have learned a lot about this city and its journey along the way. And I applaud any efforts that are made to make that information as accessible as possible, both to locals and to visitors, because it is an incredibly important body of work, because we all benefit from having a better shared understanding of our history and of our values. And that isn't in any way about diminishing or erasing or trampling on our settler heritage. It's about expanding on that and enriching that by telling the stories of those who came before. And as is customary, I do want to take the opportunity just in closing to thank the staff and the consultants, both past and present, because this has been an ongoing piece of work over a number of years, but especially want to thank Ōkaha and the various parties involved in providing a mana whenua perspective on this work through the co-design process, because I think the implications of that and the legacy of that work go far beyond this project. It's as much as anything else about what this has done in terms of building the capacity within our own people here at council to participate in this work and eventually find ourselves in a position where we don't have to lean quite so heavily on mana whenua to do all of the heavy lifting when we're having these sorts of debates, and we won't get there until we have developed our own internal capacity to a greater degree, and work like that has, and work the likes of which has been undertaken to get this project to this point is incredibly important in that journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I'm absolutely, fully and delightedly in support of this plan. It's been a privilege to read it and to become very excited about it. I just did a quick little tot up of 10 things that I love about the plan, and I appreciate that others will have a different top 10. My number one was the involvement of mana whenua, who've almost been invisible in our Ōtepoti Dunedin public storytelling, and it's been a shameful loss that we haven't celebrated and shared our mana whenua stories. When I started work as a staff member at the DCC back in 2008, around the same time as Dr. Hazelton, it was very obvious that this was a huge gap in our origin and contemporary story. It's been great to see the importance of mana whenua stories respected and highlighted. From the Dunedin 2008 Dunedin Visitor Strategy, 2011 Central City Plan, and the 2013 Economic Development Plan, which talked about our Ngāi Tahu cultural heritage as a distinctive element and which needed to be acknowledged. And it said visitors to and residents of Dunedin are afforded an accessible, meaningful and authentic interpretation of Ngāi Tahu historic and contemporary culture. This can be expressed more fully by increasing its visibility through events and integration into urban design. And this was a 2013 quote, so it's amazing, nearly 10 years later to see this finally happening, and with full mana whenua involvement to share their stories and placemaking skills. Number two of my favourite things is around the storytelling. The George Street project does aim to attract people and visitors to the central city, and for us, I believe, to have the best main street in New Zealand. What I find exciting is that we will have an incredible interactive experience that I believe will showcase our unique heritage in a really beautiful environment. At the moment, Tourism New Zealand are pushing hard on the importance of storytelling for the visitor experience. So it's great to see a strong focusing on storytelling, including our UNESCO City of Literature in this design. We're famous for our education, heritage and nature. This design brings it all together beautifully and celebrates our strengths to create this compelling destination for our visitors. Heritage appreciation, whether the heritage capital of New Zealand and our main street is chock-a-block full of cheek by jowl heritage buildings. I love that the sightlines are being maintained and framed, plus that the interpretation and stories are built into the experience. We will have many memories inside these buildings: Foxy's, Arthur Barnett's, August Moon Restaurant, Wing On Grocers. So it will be a fantastic opportunity for layers of rich heritage stories to be appreciated and learnt from. Businesses, the majority of businesses have been positive about this investment into their area. We all know George Street is a grey area which needs a revamp and a makeover. This will encourage people and their wallets back into the central city and encourage them to stay longer. Retail's been hit hard by so many forces in the last decade, so it's really great that we're investing into a main street experience that will be supportive of retail and a strong economy. Street gardens, that was my number 5. Love the street gardens, which I think are a really exciting addition. We'd love to bring nature back to the centre of the city as the wildlife capital of New Zealand. Number 6, parking. We've all been focusing on parking, and it's been great to hear from the team that they are focusing on maintaining the number of parks. One of the key issues that we've heard about is parking accessibility, and I'm very comfortable to hear through questioning today that this is being kept top of mind. Playground was number 7. As a parent, that would be a godsend. Happy to hear about that the safety concerns will be addressed too. The seating and eating areas. COVID's shown us the importance of dining al fresco in Dunedin. We're very good at providing lots of al fresco, so I think that will encourage people to visit this enhanced area. I'm also really happy about my favourite thing, number 9, coordination. I'm very grateful that this is a sensible plan. Sorry, 1 minute, I'm just about there. Where everything's being addressed to ensure the least disruption for another 30 years or so. And I'm really pleased to hear that there's a site office where people can go and engage with the team. Number 10, I love the basket and weaving analogy for the project. This is really beautiful in so many ways. The gathering of food, acknowledgement of heritage, focus on trade, design elements, and bringing everyone together. At our heart are the people of Dunedin, and this project is for them and our future together to make Dunedin one of the best places in New Zealand to live. And this is a flagship project for us. Thank you for your patience with me, and I'm going to go and see some penguins now. I'm voting yes.
Thank you. Councillor Stones.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, can I thank staff and in particular the co-design team that have put so much effort into developing this gorgeous concept. I'm really heartened that the way this has been put together, the way it will tell stories, the way that it tells the stories of mana whenua and brings elements from their history into our main street, I think is exceptional. It will provide the opportunity for visitors to our city to see those stories, to be in an environment where they can not only see the historic buildings, but understand the history of the area to mana whenua and what it meant. The co-design process, I think, has delivered an exceptional design concept. And I believe it'll stand out nationally for the way it tells the story of Mana Whenua and what can be achieved when genuine engagement or a genuine effort is made to engage with Mana Whenua in a major project. I'm even more convinced that as a result of taking the difficult decision to radically upgrade our historic main street, our retailers will reap the reward of greater foot traffic generated by the gorgeous environment, and I will definitely vote in favour.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. As you all know, probably, I wouldn't call myself the most Māori in Dunedin or a Ngāti Poti, but I do whakapapa to a Ngāi Tahu or Kai Tahu descendant. And what I have really felt during this process, certainly yesterday, hearing Megan Potiki speak and the words of her late husband, Tahu Potiki, is that he has been part of this with her during this process and in part of some of the designs and things that are happening around George Street. And I think that's really special. I have also noticed how it's just my perception, but it means a lot for Mana Whenua. I can see that in the way they've reacted to things and the fact that Māori will be seen, Māori designs, Māori stories will be told. And I think that's really important because for my children, they're Kai Tahu as well. And I think it's good for them to hear some of those stories because they don't get to hear a lot of it. We haven't grown up at a marae and we're not heavily involved in Māori things, but we do. I certainly have a strong interest and support, the iwi, because I think Kai Tahu is an extremely good iwi and they're quite astute with their business things as well, which I think is great. So that part of this process, I think, I've seen is really good, and thank you. I also think Dr. Hazelton is a great person to lead this project because he's very good at engagement, has a proven track record, and I wish him well for his well-being. And my recommendation there would be, good idea, don't look at the social media. And what I'd like to also say is I love this is from my former career as a person who used to run the New Zealand Book Awards. I love it that we're going to have some UNESCO City of Literature things incorporated into George Street, gorgeous street. And the good marketing word there, by the way, whoever invented that. And so I really appreciate that. I love that the arts is going to be represented. However, I do have some issues with some of the processes. I am really concerned that business owners haven't been talked to and asked and engaged around whether they want a tree outside their business instead of a car park, because I saw how upset many of the businesses were in South Dunedin, as I mentioned earlier, when they said to me, look at this, and they pointed at the tree that had been put there to beautify and such the street. And, when you looked at it, they said, look, people are just throwing cigarette butts in it. There's dirt everywhere. It looks messy. And we could have 2 cars parked here. Now, those are really valid points for businesses. And while I'm all in support for, I want to see us be less reliant on cars. But with that comes, we have to have a far better public transport system. And that needs to be, worked in. So we need to have better access to buses, better access. I'd love us to have a train system, all of those things, but none of that's happening just yet. So while, there are people who will always, though, need to use a car. So despite all these issues, we still do need to provide for cars. And yes, we are in this, which is good. However, if I was a business owner, I would be annoyed to see a tree. Well, I like trees as well, but a tree in place of where a car could be outside my business. Because there's a lot of people who drive by, stop, run in and buy something. I do that all the time. So I am concerned about that. I am also really concerned about the business owners themselves and their well-being. Right now, it's not our fault, but the timing of this major project is absolutely terrible. We have businesses who have 2 years of COVID, and quite frankly, I'm sick to the death of it, and I'm not in a retail business in the CBD. So I know I just can't even imagine how bad they're feeling. And right now they've had COVID restrictions, and then on top of that, they've had a lot of the, people who would normally be working in the CBD aren't working in the CBD anymore. They're working from home. So they're hit again with that. And now there's going to be, they knew this disruption was coming, but now it's going to be even worse. And this is what they're dreading. And I just hope many of those businesses remain and can become viable, really viable and strong. So my hope is that we can have strong business viability and supporting the businesses.
Thank you. The next speaker is Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Hazelton, and everyone involved for what is an outstanding report and the culmination, obviously, of something that started back in 2011. And yes, Dr. Hazelton, I was a member of the public back in 2011 when I came to council and spoke about my desire to see the whole of George Street pedestrianised. But I guess I live in hope on that one. And I guess it proves the old mantra that if you want something to work, well, take your time. In terms of local authorities, community engagement is indeed gold. And there's been no shortage of that in getting to this point. So thank you to everybody involved in that, including the public. And rarely do we get the advantage around this, what is a virtual table, of seeing the reaction to something that was released today earlier. But in this case, we do. For those who do follow social media, it was going pretty potty yesterday afternoon and all last night as people absorbed what is one of the most significant changes in our city centre in a generation. And yes, there was the usual Jurassic whingers bemoaning council spending of other people's money, of removing car parks, saying it's too cold, it's too windy in Dunedin to eat outside. My reply to them was simply, well, it's not cold when it's not cold. And some rather unsavoury comments about allowing mana whenua input. Fortunately, these non-progressive, out-of-date and out-of-touch commentaries were vastly outnumbered by an excited public, actually, embracing something truly transformational for a largely confident, inclusive and progressive wee city that we can be proud of. Commentaries such as, and I'll quote a few that I picked out just about 3 hours ago. The first one was, I love the thought that this could be Dunedin city centre. Another one says, looks like a much more relaxing, inviting environment. Another one, certainly looks more like somewhere I'd like to shop. The next one, really like the thought in mahi that has gone into making this more accessible. Another one, finally, we are dragging ourselves into the 21st century. The second to last one, fantastic to see planned greenery and art pieces. It's so dull and grey at present. And my current favourite quote from social media goes like this: I wanted to hate this, but it actually looks pretty cool. And that's pretty much a flavour. They go on, and that's pretty much the flavour of the stuff I've seen on social media. And going back to the detractors who for some reason believe that progression and development means doing nothing. In terms of the parking report, the parking report is very clear, and I'll quote, you've all read it, but I'll quote it for the public. Parking numbers are generally similar to existing numbers. However, the time restrictions have shortened overall to allow more turnover and better access to retail businesses. I don't think that could be clearer. And I'm sorry if that disarms the parking lobby of one of their traditional pieces of weaponry, albeit an antiquated and I think rather redundant piece of weaponry. And in terms of spending other people's money, I've got news for you all out there. It's the same money we spend on libraries, museums, putting fresh drinking water into your taps, taking your waste away, roading and footpaths, collecting your rubbish, reserves, galleries, social housing, economic development, the list goes on. And why do we spend money in things like upgrading a unique retail quarter? Well, that's our job. It's our job as elected members to invest to protect what we have now and to invest for intergenerational benefit so that our city is continuously enhanced, improved, and importantly, that it prospers. Finally, I personally support this amazing project because I, like probably most of you, genuinely believe in putting people first, greening the city, having streets as places, improving safety, accessibility for pedestrians and other vulnerable road users, making George Street a more attractive place for people to visit, to spend money, and to shop. I also agree, you all do, on replacing our degraded, extremely old and dysfunctional infrastructure. And I definitely agree in incorporating Kai Tahu cultural values into the final project. And in closing, I commend the project team and all of the DCC staff in general for getting us to this point where we can ensure Dunedin will be holding its hand up. And this goes to what Councillor Stain said, we can hold our hands up as a world-beating 21st century Enviro city, embracing heritage, art, literature, design, and putting Mana Whenua at its heart. What on earth can be wrong with that? Thank you.
Nicely timed, Councillor. You were 4 seconds over only. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. As many of you know, I was not a supporter of one-way George Street. That vote's been had, we've moved on, and now is the time to make sure that we get a very effective one-way George Street. I wondered what we would end up with. I also wondered what our community would think of it. And I think all in all, I think this is probably the best outcome we could have gotten. When we look at what the imagery shows, this will be a first-class street. It will bring people back to spend money. It will bring people to enjoy the area and space. I love the Totally Gorgeous tagline, and I think there's a lot more we can do with that, and we need a lot more promotion. And I'll call on economic development to assist in that space. Because the one thing we have to do is not wait till it's finished and get people to George Street. We have to get people to George Street now. Yes, there's going to be issues around construction. And yes, I've actually harped on them many a time about how we can work double shifts, how we can get more done quicker, how we can minimize closed streets, because I've heard loud and clear the effect it's having on those businesses. So as much as the team can do that, and I know the contractors are under the pump to try and do that as well, the quicker we get through this project, the better. And it is going to be a balancing act. But for all we've talked about the future of George Street, I'm pleasantly heartened by what it's going to look like. I also appreciate the engagement that's gone into it. I love the Mana Whenua story, and I appreciate Kaha taking their time and being a big part of this. I echo Councillor Barker's comments about how they've taken pieces, for example, the basket and woven it in. And there will be something for everybody. And I think that's the important part. I think every part of our community will see themselves in that space. But more importantly, you know what? I thank Dr. Hazelton and his team for what they have done. This is a monumental shift in the sense of trying to get people away from looking at George Street as it currently to where it's going. And yes, there are many on social media, and I haven't spent too much time on it, but to see the comments, positive and negative, but they've got to realize George Street is going to change. It was always going to change. And I think this outcome is going to be a very positive one. And I actually look forward to seeing this completed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lord.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, I totally support this. I've been a supporter from day dot. I think the inconvenience to retailers is definitely a problem that we all have a concern about. But unfortunately, holding it off and waiting perhaps 2 or 3 years till times are more appropriate, it's just, in my opinion, a huge risk. And we could end up with the situation where our sewerage in our streets or pipeworks fail, which could just put this back just ridiculous amounts. I'm really pleased about the fact that we're going to partially pedestrianise, or not partially pedestrianise, but move to a shared space model. I would have liked to have seen, certainly with the Meridian block, a complete pedestrianisation, but I realise that it's hard to do one block in the middle of a street. So it's either go partial now and wait until some point in the future when we do a total one. But I think on top of this, the building owners have got the opportunity, and will get the opportunity to put apartments upstairs and do all sorts of other things as well. And I think this place, I mean, I heard even Dr. Hazelton say he's happy occasionally to shop online and buy things. I haven't quite come to that position yet where I'm comfortable doing that, but it may well be that in the future that is how we do most of our shopping, and it might be that George Street is purely a place where we feel comfortable going to eat our meals, going to drink our coffees, going to bars, or whatever it is that people do. And so for me, just like 30 years ago when they upgraded in 1988, I remember the wow factor the first time I went to town after months and months of upgrading the street, and months of inconvenience, and months of walking over sort of duck boards and round fences and all that sort of stuff. And then I remember going into town when it was all finished, and I was just absolutely gobsmacked. It was a bit like turning Dunedin into surface paradise. And I think the opportunity there to see this again in 2 years' time is going to be quite outstanding. And if tourists that come on the cruise ships were raving about Dunedin in the past, they'll be raving about it again in the future. So totally supportive, and I commend all the staff that have worked on this, and just absolutely wrapped.
Thank you. Councillor Reddick.
Thank you. This is a beautiful design. I like the look, the vegetation, and the general streetscape, you know, and I really like the derivation aspect of elements of the design that link back to mana whenua and tell a story that can be included into public information. I very much enjoyed Simon Kahn's presentation of the art and those linkages that we received yesterday. Those connections are important, and I absolutely agree that obvious inclusion of local mana whenua sensibilities, stories, and creativity into our built environment is long overdue. Unfortunately, the street layout is on the wrong side of history. I believe that people do not want to go back to the 50s. They do not want to get wet and cold on a push bike going to and from work, nor when they go shopping, carting all their purchases. They want to cycle for fun and for convenience. So they'll use their bike when it suits them, but they do not want to be made to use one just because it suits someone else's narrative and they can't get into George Street easily any other way. Similarly, they'll use public transport if it's cheaper and easier, but a big slow-moving bus is not particularly appealing. So same again. People do not want to be forced onto a bus just to suit someone else's narrative, then have to walk a distance to get to the shops. They would sooner do their shopping online, and that presents a very real danger to what is the essence of George Street. A great many people have to use cars to get around, and we know that 3 times as many people use a car to access George Street than by any other means, and that includes all the students who live nearby and find it easy to walk. This design makes car access to George Street much more difficult. And in a world where convenience is king, that does not bode well for the success of shops on that street. This design is fundamentally flawed, taking no account of the great majority of residents' needs and desires, but rather trying to bully them into something they do not want just to suit a particular narrative. George Street's developed over time for shops and shoppers, but this design, mislabeled more inclusive, is coming at the expense of those people most affected by it, the shops and the shoppers. It's no wonder that the businesses are little interested in participating in discussions. I'm sorry, Glenn, but their submissions and thoughts, and 6,500 signatures have been disregarded. So you're up against it, and I'm sorry for that. But those shops and shoppers greatly fear that this superb shopping street will degenerate into a row of cheap shops and high crime, just as Cuba Street has. So in particular, the elderly will find it more difficult to get to George Street, and the lack of two-way traffic will make it a more dangerous place. And this design comes at the expense of the possibility of keeping it a two-way system and keeping access and public transport, a loop bus running in both directions. And that is what people signaled they wanted. And it was very clear, and it has been clear from polls that we've seen since and during, that that is what the public of Dunedin wanted to have. We could have had all of the design elements, all of the vegetation, all of the streetscape looking every bit as good, but with the accessibility that people want. And not only the accessibility, but the safety. And therefore we would keep the vibrance and ensure the vibrance of this street. I fear that we're putting that vibrance, and especially the economic vibrance and viability of the street in jeopardy here. And that is quite distressing.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I felt very proud today, or yesterday, when I first saw the design. Very much a people and future focused design for our main street. And I want to start by acknowledging, as others have, the collective work of Dr. Glenn Heseltine, Megan Potiki and Simon Khan, the latter two in their role with Okaha, for their creative collaboration. I considered it to be stunning. And I understand the balancing that you had to do to arrive at this design. And yes, it's been a long time in the process. And just as a reminder, we've been hearing in recent days about issues in Christchurch with their ageing infrastructure. So let's remember why we're doing this project, and that we're taking the opportunity to deliver a beautiful streetscape for all in this design. And I mentioned people focused. I absolutely loved hearing the very moving narrative around Kaitahu values. It spoke to me of real partnership, and I rejoice and celebrate that, and thank those who've worked so hard to achieve that. It also was inclusive of other voices, and I want to talk about one of those voices, and that's the disability community. I was incensed, would be the word, when I heard that one business didn't understand why mobility parks had to be provided. Well, clearly they have never had anyone in their life having to use a mobility park. And the whole idea, I just need to remind colleagues of, is that people can use the space in a variety of ways, using a variety of mode of transport. But for those who need to continue to arrive by car, that gives the space for them to do so. And I thank the team for their awareness of the disability community and working with that community from the beginning. But also inclusive of older residents, young families, and workers out having their lunch, sometimes in a cafe, sometimes bringing their own lunch. The idea of placemaking and the urban lounge concept rejoiced in, and it spoke to the livability of our city and how important that is for our future generations, but also the people choosing to migrate to our city. The biodiversity aspects are fabulous, the native birds returning to our central city. And as for a tree versus a car park, well, I sure as hell know which I would sooner have. But we have retained all the car parks. The creative elements were exciting. The safety and accessibility elements were extremely important. And just in case anyone doesn't understand, urban design can be used to reduce crime, and that's what will happen with the elements that we see in this design. It will be a draw card for people to return and spend their money in the city. And I just remind colleagues that part of the equation of business is the person who spends their money. It isn't just the person providing the business. And the people who spend their money come in all shapes and sizes and mobilities. And so don't forget about that wide variety of people, because I believe the wider Dunedin community are really wanting to see this happen. Aspects that I particularly loved of the cultural narrative were the patterns from Otako Marae, the Aramoana and Pātiki stained glass patterns I recognised as windows that I have noted in the church at Otako in the Wharenui, and they are beautiful, and it was delightful to see them there. They're particularly beautiful colours, and they add to the ambience and atmosphere of the street.
1 minute.
As for the QR codes, I've seen that work so well in Reykjavik, another city of literature. I think they will add to the narrative, and it's great to see the city of literature there. And I'd like to acknowledge Simon Drew and his team and Isaacs as they go forward to deliver the infrastructure part of this. And it will require patience. It will require patience through this construction phase, and it will require us in the community to keep our eye on the goal. And I wish Dr. Hazeltine and Mr. Drew and team, all of the staff, they have our confidence, and I know that they will deliver an excellent result. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elder.
Kia ora. I too, like Andrew, had a preference for two-way, but on looking at this design and the amount of space it gives to creativity, just looking at that picture, and for greening of our city and beautiful spaces, I am really, really impressed. I come from the Eastern Bay, and I holidata up at Waiho Bay pretty much every year. And when I came to Dunedin, I was shocked. And that was that there was no reference to Māori culture in our community, pretty much none at all. And I felt like there was a lack of colour and vibrancy and acknowledgement and mana for the Māori people that live in Dunedin. And it's been a real passion of mine that we would uplift our Māori people, but also that they would see themselves proudly reflected in our community. And I just think how important it is as anyone. I mean, us Pākehās see our culture reflected back to us all the time, but it's really important for everyone to feel, to have mana, to feel included, and to be a part of the community. And so I'm just so really excited about the co-design work with Okaka, Megan and Simon, and really excited about that, and some extra bits like sculptures coming into this. I note that you know, some of the concerns of our community do need to be addressed, and I note a huge concern about parking, and I've talked to a number of people who are actually older that don't sort of fit the mobility kind of picture, who say it's really, really important for them to be able to park close to where they need to shop. And I think Glenn has worked really, really hard on this. The design team has worked really, really hard on this. And I asked lots of questions about that because of people's concerns. And so it's really pleasing to see that we've retained the number of parks, because we have got an ageing population. We do have to look after our mobility impaired, and getting off close to where you want to go is really important for them. And I really was pleased with the idea that actually how we use those parks could be flexible depending on the time of day. So I'm really pleased about that. And also the parking roadmap and enabling access to parking buildings that really are needed I was a mum of 4. It's really difficult to get to a place and herd all your kids. And so oftentimes when you've got complex journeys, you need to take your car. So, but you need to be able to know where to find a park. So it's that roadmap around parking, I think, is really important. And so I'm really pleased about that. I also was concerned just at the night time, you know, we want the space to be vigorous at night time and people to be interacting at night time and using that space. But the fact that there's some really good design around lighting to make people safe, I think that has been addressed as well. So I'm really, really, really happy with the look and feel of this. And this is a report for noting, and I just want to note that it looks very beautiful, and the responses online have been on generally positive, because some of those things that people were concerned about were being addressed within the design. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Ms. Wesley.
I think it's going to come as no surprise that I am hugely supportive of this, and I see this as a really progressive and exciting change for the centre of the city. So there's been a lot of talk around the lack of visibility of mana whenua in this particular space. And although we haven't had a permanent presence in this particular part of the city since 1844, when the Otago block was sold to make room for the new settlement of New Edinburgh, we have had a number of temporary instances of visibility, including the 1998 Otago 150th anniversary celebrations, when mana whenua occupied the Octagon for a week. A much nicer occupation, I must say, than the more recent one. And also the 2011 World Cup, when art installation by Ngāi Tahu artist Octagon as well. However, what I find most exciting about this is that the reflection of mana whenua that will be incorporated into George Street is not a temporary moment of visibility for mana whenua. It is a permanent visibility, reminding us of the permanence of mana whenua from Otako and Puketeraki to the city of Dunedin. I'd like to congratulate the council in particular on taking a stand around incorporating mana whenua input. Having, you know, as mana whenua being on the receiving end of some of the more blinkered attitudes around the city, I think it is very brave that the council decided to make a stand and between a mana whenua and the city. I think it embodies the principles of partnership that we have been aiming for, and I am looking forward to seeing more instances of co-design and co-management on projects with the city into the future. One of the things that also comes to mind is something that you hear quite often when you grow up in Dunedin, around Dunedin being a Presbyterian city. Our history is rooted in Presbyterianism. So seeing mana whenua values reflected that embody Te Ao Kaitahu worldview, it's not only reflecting our view as Kaitahu and mana whenua here, but it's also reflecting the values of a quintessential Dunedin that is home to many, many people. It's not very Presbyterian at all. So a lot of those values that are incorporated are around the things that Dunedin has always held dear about our ability to host and welcome visitors, look after our people. I really like the way that the design creates place. There's nowhere else in the world that can tell the stories that are being told in the George Street design. Nowhere, not even elsewhere within the South Island of New Zealand. So the potential as an entertainment and retail and whānau draw card, I just find really, really exciting. I'm also excited by the elements that are being incorporated into the design that practically extends our cultural heritage institutions into the streetscape. So just excited. The green spaces, again, massive fan. Biodiversity brought right into the city is always a good thing. So the references back to mahi kakai, to the ngahere, greening the urban landscape enhances our holistic well-being, both as a community, but also as each of us as one component of a much wider ecosystem.
1 minute.
Oh gosh, I didn't think I'd last that long. Okay, the whole project has represented a changed way of thinking about partnership and how we live in the world where the impacts of climate change are upon us. I'm satisfied with the work that's been done around accessibility and sustainability. That's important to me as a wahine Māori, because looking after our takata whaiora, our kaumātua, our tamariki and taiōhi is really, really important. So I am pleased with the work that has been done and will continue to be done to make sure that that works for those communities. And just lastly, I want to mihi to all of the mana whenua who have been involved in this project beyond those who are employed or contracted by Ōkaha. There are a number of people from Ōtākau and Puketeraki Rūnaka who have supported and provided their expertise to this. So ka mihi kia koutou katoa.
Perfect timing, Councillor. Sorry, Ms. Wesley, that is. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. About 4 years ago, I gave the Mayor's speech at the Otago anniversary dinner, and the speech is to the settlers. So when I made the speech, I made the point that when the Scots came to Dunedin, they were the second wave of settlers to come to this region, and that the first wave had preceded them 800 years earlier. It was met with a certain amount of silence, but in fact, it's something that I think we need to recognise the reality of that. And I really am happy to see in this design the reflection of that. And this is the start of where we are moving, where the salt water and the fresh water mix together. I hope that in the future, we see more of this coming. And I know that we are going to have the bridge to the harbour side built at some point in the future. And there is talk of mana whenua design there as well. And I think that will be particularly relevant given that the Toitu landing grounds, if they were to extend it out into the harbour now, would probably be where the harbour, where the steamer basin is. So this design that we're seeing in George Street and the role of the work, the great work that Ōkaha did with both Puketeraki and Ōtākau helping, is a really great first step towards establishing a true and obvious Māori presence in Dunedin. And so I find it very exciting. And the whole design is absolutely beautiful and sophisticated. I think that we will probably have the best main street in the country when this is built. And I'm really excited about getting on with it, to be honest. I think when it's done, we're going to just be really, really, really happy with what we've done, and we'll be able to proudly stand beside it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Lofiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. As colleagues have stated, I just really want to mihi to mana whenua involved directly and also indirectly with this project. And again, just mihi to you for your patience and your aroha, your giving and sharing with us. And it's been said through the course of this debate that this is a world where convenience is king. Well, I challenge that, because this is a world where relationships have broken down or have never been right. And so this is a very visible way of us as tauiwi, all of us who are not Māori, going on a journey in terms of real mutually beneficial relationships. And I just want to mihi to the staff, past and current, and in particular, when I think of statements made, you know, that people feel disregarded, business people feel disregarded. No matter how upset or disappointed you are, there's no excuse for abuse of staff. And I particularly want to mihi to Ms. Ward, who was abused as a POM, and there was a great degree of misogyny. So when we're talking about a world of convenience, we're also talking about a world that allows bullying and exclusion. So I just want to thank the mover and again, mihi to the staff. Kia kaha.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor van der Vest.
I have long wondered how it is possible to spend $28 million just on surface treatments for George Street. Not the pipes, not the drainage, not the electrical supply, just the surface treatments. Reading this 157-page design report, it's beginning to become obvious to me just how this enormous wasteful spend is being achieved. The claim that it would cost $12 million to renew all the asphalt and curbed channel for all of the George Street blocks, I believe, is misleading, since much of the needed underground infrastructure work would normally be done with thrust boring equipment that doesn't require ripping everything up. The argument that we had to do this and we had to do it now because of pipes that needed replacing, to me, simply doesn't wash. We used to have the best retail main street of any city in New Zealand. It has always had very strong traffic flows, north and south. It has, over the last few years, had a lot of parking in it and around it, reduced at a time when our population has gone up and we actually needed more parking. But what we have now is a situation where essentially we are going to lose all the traffic flow up and down George Street, most of the access to George Street by car, and what this supposed upgrade is going to give us is a permanent traffic snarl and permanent constriction of access to George Street. I believe that it will have the effect of driving a lot of retailers out of the city centre. I was speaking to one of those retailers yesterday, has a very large shop frontage that she says is just not going to be able to be viable anymore without the vehicular access that suits retail. It will, I think, have some advantage for the cafe culture, people that just want to come into the middle of town and have a cup of coffee or go to a restaurant. I think that will probably be served by this design. But there is nothing productive or economically vibrant about a cafe culture. It's simply just spending overpriced drinks. We need a vibrant retail centre, and this plan does not give it to us. This upgrade, in my view, is a severe downgrade of the traffic flow and access. It fails to upgrade the necessary parking, which has been cut back over several years now, and will downgrade retail business in favour of an unproductive cafe culture. All of this at a time when our debt is escalating at an unprecedented rate, when interest rates are going up by the month. 6% is what I heard from the ANZ today. None of this is achievable. We don't have the money for it. It's all going to be borrowed. And I believe that it's been done against the wishes of most Dunedin people.
1 minute.
I've said before, and I'll say it again now, the vast majority of your annual plan submissions opposed this George Street plan. And that included all but one of the community groups from the different regions. We had the biggest petition that Dunedin has seen, 6,500 signatures, again, very much opposed, retailers opposed, and yet this has been pushed through unaffordably at a time of significant opposition. I grant that the design is attractive enough, and it's nice that a lot of Maori culture has been included in that design. I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem with changing something that didn't need changing, with basically doing something that's unaffordable, that is going to strangle the retailer out of the central city.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. I disagree more with what we've just heard. And I'm delighted that councillors, the vast majority of councillors, have shown their overwhelming support for what is a stunning design, and demonstrated in doing that, I think, that they realise their responsibilities as councillors for the whole city. We're not councillors for one sector. We've got a responsibility for everyone who lives and works and visits this place. And this is one of our key public spaces. We probably do need to talk about the Octagon sooner rather than later. But this main shopping street is unique in the whole country, actually. And when people talk about support for business, well, $28 million for the front garden and the access and everything that's in this design is a pretty substantial vote of support for business as well as the rest of the community. And I'd like to repeat something you've heard me say before, that we don't have a tight, cohesive retail CBD by accident. We have it because for decades, council policies and policies from well before the last 2 or 3 councils have resisted the retail breakout that has so damaged so many other parts of this country. It's not an accident, and the support that these consecutive councils have shown for retail, especially in the CBD, stands on the record. It's absolutely clear, and the only breakout we have had is minor and was actually the result of a decision of the Environment Court that the council opposed. So we don't have that CBD as we do now by accident, but it sure does need refurbishment, and that's what this is about. It's not just this work that's supporting the city and the business community, of course, and the other most significant thing that's happening contemporaneously is the extraordinarily important build just a block and a half away of the hospital, the 2 hospital buildings, and the much wider and hugely significant health precinct that we've been briefed on, that's been approved by the DHB. Who would have thought that councillors, and many of you here, assisted in the campaign to get that hospital site in town? Who would have thought that a major supermarket would invite us to campaign for that site, or a central city site, in their own premises? That's pretty unprecedented. And most retailers know the good sense of that council decision to ensure the maintenance of 3,000 plus workers next door to the med school in the central city for customers and visitors alike. So to the design then, I'm as excited and pleased as almost everyone else about the quality of the work that's been produced by staff. I don't think I've ever heard in a council meeting the use of the word excited so often. It's a stunning design, and I think we have something really special here. And I think we all know that the community is going to love it. And that's good, but they deserve it. The only speaker that remains is no one else is indicating they wish to speak. So I'll go to the Mayor for his right of reply.
Before you do, Mr. Chairman, I do notice that Mr. Ellison has returned and would offer him the opportunity to speak before.
Thank you. I also meant to observe that Ms. Barker has returned from somewhere on the peninsula, so she's with us. Mr. Allison, would you like to make some comment?
Kia ora anō te tiamana. Mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I once again had some little technical difficulty, but here I am again. I just want to say I am so pleased to be associated with such a wonderful project. The design, the co-design has worked extremely well, and I really feel this is a tangible symbol of a bicultural pathway going forward. So that's all I want to say. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Right of reply, Mia Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would have hoped at this meeting we could have avoided relitigating the decisions of the past around the funding for this project and the previous decisions that have been made around the road layout. And I thank and welcome the response, the pragmatic and mature response from councillors Wiley and Elder in that regard. That it's time to get on with it and make the best of the decisions that we have previously made. I do feel the need to respond to a few things. I mean, Councillor Raddick is right in that there is an option that would send us lurching into the past, but it isn't this one. This is an option for the city centre that is very much centred around what it means to build public space in the 21st century in a bicultural context. And it's disappointing to hear the comments about how this has been mislabeled as being more inclusive. It absolutely is a more inclusive design for our city centre than the one that we currently have. And if people need reminding of that, please do go back and look at the accessibility audit that was done a couple of years ago in looking at what we are going to do in George Street. And that was embarrassing, actually, for me, looking at and becoming aware of who was being actively excluded from our city centre because of the decisions and the priorities that we had made. And this is all about trying to address that. And I suppose, as the old saying goes, if all you have known is privilege, then justice feels like oppression. And this is about making space for people who we have actively shut out of the heart of the city. And I couldn't be prouder of that element of this work. And so that is, and it's disappointing that we have elected members resorting to the kind of fear mongering that we have seen at this meeting. The spectre of assaults and ram raids is today's special, and what will happen to crime and creating a sense of fear in the community that I think is unfounded and irresponsible of the elected leadership. It's also disappointing to hear, after 2 pretty tough years for our hospitality industry, that entire sector be denigrated in the way that we have heard at this meeting. It is a significant industry in this city and a significant part of what makes this a great city to be in. And for them to be slated in totality is quite a remarkable thing to witness at a city council meeting. As has been pointed out, there has been plenty of feedback from people who, I think it was Councillor Walker who mentioned this, wanted to hate it but can't once they've seen it. And I guess that is the problem we'll always have in trying to, it's the difference between having an abstract discussion and a 10-year plan process about spending $28 million on doing a project and getting feedback on that versus showing people the imagery of what it is that we are looking to create and getting feedback on that. And there's no easy way around that. But I thank those who have managed to reflect on their previous opinions and change them once they've seen the work that has been done. This has always been a compromise option, as Councillors Lord and Walker have pointed out. There are plenty of people who wanted us to be far more ambitious about a number of the elements here. and certainly it was important to us that the design was done in such a way that would allow for further shifts according to a demand further on. We absolutely have to be looking at this as a whole, across, not just across George Street, but across the central city plan. And we can't do that by going door to door asking tree or car park, tree or car park. That isn't how you plan a central, that isn't how you plan a central city. What have I got? The only other thing, just in closing, it was brave of Councillor Barker to raise the spectre of Foxy's. It had a different name as an establishment when I was younger, but a very similar reputation. And sometimes some of our social histories are better forgotten. And I will leave you, Mr. Chairman, on that scandalous note.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Barker, you're hearing us and able to take part in the vote? Okay, we'll do it by division. Ms. Collard, are you with us?
Ms. McDonald is with you.
Ms. McDonald, thank you very much, Ms. McDonald. Would you call a division, please? The motion is that we note the George Street Retail Quarter Developed Design Report.
Councillor Barker.
Aye.
Councillor Elder. Councillor Elder.
Councillor.
Sorry, it's been a long day. Aye.
Mr. Ellison.
Aye.
Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Your Worship.
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan.
Aye.
Councillor Lefiso.
Aye.
Councillor Lord.
Aye.
Councillor Wiley.
Caught me off guard. Aye.
Yeah. Councillor O'Malley.
Me too. Aye.
Councillor Reddick.
No.
Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Walker.
Aye.
Ms. Wesley.
Aye.
Chairperson, Councillor Benson Pope.
Aye. Mr. Ellison is waving, I think.
The motion is carried 13 against 2.
Did you call Mr. Ellison?
Yes, I did.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. I beg your pardon. 13. The result is 13-2. Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you, colleagues, for a very productive couple of 3 hours. I will close the meeting and wish you a safe and happy evening.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Councillor.
I think it 30, I thought we had 14, sorry, we had 16 people here.
Councillor Staines appears to not be here at the minute.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Staines had messaged me that he had to, our previous commitment he had to go to and wouldn't be here for the vote. Thank you. All right. We're all balances. Have a safe evening.
Happy Easter, everyone.
Bye, councillors.
Happy Easter.